The Mishnah said if she was taken for a mominus, then we can assume that they would not have violated her because they are afraid that they won't get their payment for her. On that, Reb Shmuel bar Yitzchak said that's only in a place where they're subject to some type of law and order, and they could lose in court if there's an accusation that they violated this woman. But where the goyim are in charge, when we're being oppressed by the goyim, there, no matter what, unless there was edim, we wouldn't be able to allow this woman to be mutal l'bayla. Now, on the Mishnah, we had a discussion that according to Rashi and Tosfos, we're afraid that she was nisratzis, and even if she's an Eishes Yisrael, she would be usher to her husband. It was the other Rishonim, headed by the Ramban, who argued and said, no, this is only speaking about a Eishes Kohen. But this halacha that Amar Rab Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Amar Rav, who says that if it's kifa, Yad Yisrael, there we are concerned that she would be violated. That's for sure only usher for a kohen, because there we're afraid that they will be violent and violate her. So that for sure wouldn't be baratzin, and that for sure would only be talking about asking her to a kohen. That's what some of the Rishonim mentioned. So Zok to Gemara, the Gemara starts off challenging this halacha because the Gemara quoted a story where Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzev, Rabbi Yosy a Kohen and Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzev, they said eidos that there was a Jewish girl that was her Hannah. Her Hannah is a larger level. Rashi tells us on Amud Aleph that her Hannah means that there's a deal that you're holding this woman as collateral, and if you don't pay up by a certain date, she's yours. And that date passed, and they didn't pay up. So that's much worse. And in that case, these girls that were given over as a mashkin in Ashkelon, when they came back, eventually, I guess they were bailed out. When they came back, they were treated like they had been violated, and nobody from the family of Kohanim wanted them close because they were afraid that by mistake somebody would marry them and they would ruin their Kohen Yichus because they are considered Zionis. But the problem is that the same Edom that said that this happened to her or to these girls also said that we were there the whole time watching, and we know that they were not violated. And the Chachamim said, you have to believe the Edom. So based on that story, the Gemara says as follows. This story had occurred in Ashkelon. Ashkelon, we know, is a city where the Yad Ovdei Kechavim are Tkifa Alatzman. Now, according to Shmuel bar Yitzchak Amar Rav, if the Goyim are dominant and they're oppressing us, then we would have to be concerned that they violate her. The problem is here the case was Hurana. Hurana, like we said, is a much more giving over to them. They sort of own her. There they'll for sure violate her. But in the case of merely Nechbesha, where she was seized because of a debt, she wasn't actually given over as a mashkin, there it's mashma, since the story happened with Hurana, it's mashma that if she was merely seized and it was only Nechbesha, it wouldn't need Edom. So in fact, that contradicts what Shmuel bar Yitzchak said. Because according to Shmuel bar Yitzchak, even if this case was merely Nechbesha, it would have also required Edom. Yet the case here is only if she was Hurana, she needs Edom. And that is the kasha that we left off with. The Katani, moving on to Amud Aleph. Hurana in Nechbeshaloi. The Braisa only tells us that she needed to have Edom. To say that she was kosher is because she was Hurana. But if she was only Nichbesha, she wouldn't have needed the Edom. And if that's the case, it's shver, because according to Shmuel Yitzchak Barav, even if it was merely Nechbesha, she would still have needed Edom to declare that she was not violated. Let's see Rashi inside, where Rashi gives the details of the difference between Hurana and Nechbesha. So by Hurana, Rashi says, the Midas, she was willingly given over as a mashkin, that's collateral. Since the deadline to pay up the debt arrived and she had not yet been redeemed, in other words, the debt was not paid off yet, At least from their perspective, she is their object. So that's why you need Edim Shalonistra, because it seems very much from their perspective that they could do whatever they want with her. They think legally they can do whatever they want with her. So because of that, she needs Edim Shalonistra. But Nechbisha, which isn't so bad, because it's Edim Nechleteslem, they just took her as a mashkin. That even in their perspective, they don't own her. So there, maybe loiba Eden Edim. You wouldn't need Edim to say that she's tahar, that she was loinistera. Hoyel the moment, since it's the moment, and they're afraid they'll never get their money back. Zok to Gemara loy. Don't say that. Say even by Nechbisha, they would have needed Edim. So why didn't the Brisa quote a case of Nechbisha? Zok to Gemara, who did not feel Nechbisha would also need Edim, because the Goyim are dominant and oppressing us. You know why they picked the case in the Brisa of the case of Korana? Because that's what happened. Not because it would have only been relevant in that case, but that happens to be the case where this story happened. So now we're going to have a repeat of this same Gemara, but in two different variations. So this version that we just learned, the Gemara wanted to bring a raya from the Brisa against Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Amarav, and the Gemara wanted to prove from the Brisa that Nechbisha would be less severe than Hurana, and by Nechbisha, you wouldn't need Edim, even if the Goyim are oppressing us. In the Ikad Amri, the Gemara was actually bringing a raya to Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Amarav from this Brisa. And let's see how the Gemara presents it this time. Amarava, Afanan Nami Tanina. We also learned a similar halacha. Because hey, Rabbi Yosy HaKohen v'Reb Zechariah ben Akatzev, Abbas Yisrael shahur hana b'Ashkelon v'yichkua b'nei mishpachta v'eidei ha'moedidin aleh shalonistra v'shalonitma. The same maiden that said she was hurana also said that she was not violated. V'amu chachamim, and the chachamim told the family, imatam aminim shahurana heminu shalonistra v'shalonitma. So this is exactly the same Rashi that we're quoting. But now let's see how the Gemara presents it to come to a different conclusion. Well, Ashkelon, the Al-Yidei Momon happened. In the case of Ashkelon, it was also a case where they only seized her for money. She wasn't on death row. The Taima, the Edom Edenoisa. And nevertheless, the only reason why they were mad to her, the Chacham were mad to her, is because they had Edom. If there wouldn't have been Edom that said that she was not violated, loy, we would have assumed that she was violated. My love, let's say, there shouldn't be any difference between the case that it occurred in where it was Hurana and the case of our case of Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Amarav, where even by Nechbasha you would say the same thing. That you need Edom, and if you don't have Edom, you assume she was violated. So you have a right of Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Amarav. You don't have a right. Hurana shiny. I might be able to say that Hurana is different. Maybe only by Hurana do you require two Edom to say that she wasn't violated because you're afraid she was violated. But if it was only Nechbasha, even if it was in a city where Goyim oppress us and we don't have power, even there, because it's Machmas Mammon, even over there, you also need Edom. I'm sorry. Could be over there. You know, right? Could be if it's only Nechbasha. Even if it's in a place where Goyim control us, maybe you would not need Edom. And maybe Dafka by Hurana, you need Edom. Zog to Gemara weiter. So Loi Hurana Shani, thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Ika de Rami lo Mirma. There are those who, again, present the same information with a different twist. Oh, thank you very much. With a completely different twist. And the twist is this way. The Gemara is asking not from Shmuel Bar Yitzchak. The Gemara is going to ask Akasha directly from the case of these women that were Hurana, directly as a stira to our Mishnah, and then Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Amarav is going to come up the middle and show us how the two Mishnayos, or the Mishnah and the Brisa, are not contradictory. So let's try this out. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Al Yidei Mammon Muteris L'Bayla. Our Mishnah says that if they only seized her because of money that was owed, then they won't violate her because they don't want to lose their investment, and she'll be Muteris L'Bayla. Or many, let's ask Akasha from the Brisa. Hey, Rabbi Yosy. So the Gemara doesn't go through the entire nusach again, but we know the story. The women that were Hurana required Edim to say that they were Tahar. Fragt the Gemara of Ashkelon, the city that this story occurred in was Ashkelon, Dayat Day moment. And in that case, they only seized these women, or these women were only given over as a mashkin for a chayv. Vikatani, and the Brisa says, the time of the Edom, the only reason why we consider them tar and mutter to their husbands, because they were Edom testifying that they were not violated. So it's shver in our Mishnah that says that I moment you never need Edom. Umeshani, and the Gemara answers as follows: Amar Rab Shmuel bar Yitzchak bar Rav, Amar Rab Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Oh, it doesn't say Amar Rav. Loy kasha kan shiyad Yisrael t'kif aloyv t'gechavim. The Mishnah, which says we assume that she's tahar, is when we're in charge, and therefore we don't need to worry that they're going to violate her. But Khan, the Brisa that says that we need Edom to say testimony that in fact she was never nistera, and in fact that she was not violated. Khan shiyad t'gechavim t'kif alatzman. There, even for a moment, they're chashid to violate our women, and therefore you would need Edom to say that they didn't violate our women. So basically, we're saying the same svaras, we're just presenting the information differently. In the first variation, it was first a kasha on Reb Shmuel bar Yitzchak, which we answered. In the second version, it was a raya to Reb Shmuel bar Yitzchak, which we deflected. And in the third, it was a steer between the Mishnah and the Brisa, which we answered using the difference, the distinction that Reb Shmuel bar Yitzchak said, which is there's a difference between if Goyim have total control over us and they're oppressing us, then anything goes, and therefore we need Edom to make sure she wasn't violated. But when there's some semblance of law and order, there they won't violate her because they don't want to risk their investment. Thank you very much. So the second half of the Mishnah says that if she was on death row, then she's totally hefker, and there we have to assume that she was violated. And there's where we had a machlokes between the Ramban and Rashi and Tosfos, where the Ramban says that she's only going to be ushered to a kohen. We're not choshed that she was nisratzis, but Rashi and Tosfos learned that we're even choshed that she was nisratzis, and therefore she's going to be usher. Tosfos adds a twist to it. Even if she wasn't really nisratzis, she's only doing it because she wants to save herself. The Ramban says someone who allows herself to be novellas to save herself, that's also called a neinus. Tosfos holds that's not called a neinus, but the Ramban holds that's called a neinus. You're going to ask me from Esther, who she let herself. She said kasher avadati, she became usher to Mordechai. There was very different. It was very different. She didn't let herself. She actually instigated that occurrence. So that's why she was kasher avadati. In this case, Dr. Ramban, yes, she let herself, but she was still kakoilim. She just didn't fight back, and that would still not answer her. Nisratzis, because she's afraid for her life, that's not considered rotzen, and that would not be usher to her Baal, who is a Yisrael. Omarav, Kegoyin, Hani, Noshi, Deganve. What does it mean? Identifashes, it's like these wives of people who are ganovim. And Rashi tells us that over there, people who were stolen, who were caught, convicted for stealing, got the death penalty. Their husbands get hanged. Whenever they would give the death penalty to someone, their entire family was considered free and hefker, and anyone could violate them. The problem with this Gemara is if we slip back to Rashi on the Mishnah, Rashi on the Mishnah gives us a different explanation of what Al Yidei Nefashis is. Rashi says on the Mishnah, Al Yidei Nefashis, Shehaisani Deinis Lamisa, Lamus. She herself was on death row. So where did Rashi get this from, that she herself was on death row, when the Gemara seems to say that it's not she was on death row, it's her husband that was on death row. So that is the shaila that some people ask. So there are those who answer that if we look closely At Rashi, it says Hani Nashi de Gamve. It doesn't say Kegoyin. Rashi is not Goyrish Kegoyin. So Rashi learns that the Rav was saying a different halacha. Our Mishnah is speaking about a woman who herself is on death row. Omar Rav, Hani Nashi Gamve, the wives of people who were convicted of theft and are therefore being killed, they're also going to have this halacha. So the Mishnah's halacha is speaking where they themselves are on death row. The Gemara is adding to it. The Gemara is adding to it. Rav is adding to it other cases as well. That's how Rashi will learn. But others learn who are Gorish Tikagoyin, they obviously wouldn't learn like Rashi and the Mishnah. They're going to learn that the women that we're talking about are women whose husbands are on death row. The Levi Omar, who is it? Going Ishto shall ben dunoi. Someone who's convicted of stealing, he's not going to get killed, and his wife is not going to become hefker. But ben Dunoi's wife, who was a notorious killer, he was worse. Rasha's ben Dunoi Ritzayach Haya, Elazar Shemoy. His name was Elazar Kedamin in Beperek Egla Rufa. Avo Noshi de Ganve Hagan Vin Mamen Loy Mefkri. So they didn't just give up as hefker the family of someone who was convicted of stealing, but the family of a convicted murderer, his family was also considered hefker, and the women were violated. Any murderer, you wouldn't necessarily say this. You only say it if they were convicted of murder. And they were not only convicted, Nigmar Din Lariga means they were sentenced to death. That's when their family becomes hefker. If they're ganovim and they're caught, their family is hefker even before the Gemara. In fact, similar to the press. The press will convict you even before there's a legal verdict. Gewaltig. Sagt der Heilige Gemara weiter. Sagt the Mishnah. Here, Shekavshu Karchem, a city that was run over by an army that sieged them. Karchem, I believe, means a siege. Motzar mitagarini karchuma. So the army surrounded the city, sieged the city, breached the city, and ran it over. So imagine you have a wild mob. My grandmother told me that when the Russians came through the city that she lived in Romania at the end of the Second World War, they literally made a line of soldiers like 30 miles wide, and they literally just walked through the city, destroying everything in its path. And she said that thousands of Russian soldiers drowned in 4 inches of wine because they were so villain that they would go into the people's basements. Many people in Romania used to make wine, and they had little wine cellars in their basements. And they would go into the basement wine cellar, and they wouldn't even open up the barrel properly. They would just shoot a hole in the barrel, and the wine would start pouring out, and they would put their mouth under it and start drinking. That's how villain they were. And many of them, the wine was so strong, they actually passed out in that confined space. With the strong vapors of wine, they passed out, they went unconscious, and the barrels drained, and the little rooms had 4, 5, 6 inches of wine in them, and many, many soldiers literally drowned in wine. Now, that's what my grandmother told me. The other things, the other horrible things that they probably did as they swept through the city, my grandmother maybe felt she shouldn't share with a little boy. So the halacha is, we have to assume that every woman in the city was violated. When a marauding army comes through, we assume they leave destruction in their path. Rashi says, we assume that they violated every woman in their path. But if they have Edim that says, I was with this woman from beginning to end, and I know that she was not violated, I feel Eved, even if the aid is only an Eved, who's normally not kosher for an aid, I feel Shivcha, Hare'el Nemonim. The Ein Nemon Odom Al Yidei Atzmai. A person is not believed on himself. This is a very difficult lashon. The Achronim really harve mutter themselves to get an understanding, because really what it should have said was V'noshim Ein Nemon Al Atzmai. Ve'inomonim Odom Al Atzmai sounds like it's a much broader type of Isser. So there are those who learn that it also is referring to her husband isn't Emon on her. But most of the Achronim still remain a little bit shver What is this broad lotion of a neman odom al yedei atzmai? The other thing that the Rishonim speak out is even though a apostle aid is neman, somebody who we know is a shakran, a ganev, those people are still not believed. Only people who are apostle aid is because of their status that's out of their control, like an eved or a shofar. Uramini, frek the Gemara kasha. Baleshes sabolair. Baleshes, Rashi tells us, is chayil al shem shemechapshim kol matmoinim. Once again, they are a marauding army who will literally clean out a city, go through everything there. B'shas shalom, if it's in peaceful times, which means the soldiers aren't under stress, they can take their time and savor and enjoy all of the all of their theft that they're stealing from the people. So the halach is chavias psuchos asuros. If you have in your house an open barrel and they come in, or when you come back, you see open barrels. Obviously, we know without a doubt that they probably were menasach from those barrels to avodah zarah, because we assume that's what they do. So sumais, if your drugs are still sealed, so then they couldn't afford them to avoid zarah because they're sealed, then it'll be butaris. But if they're in the middle of fighting a war, they don't have time to do all their religious rituals and pour from wine to avoid zarah. So therefore, elu ve'elu mutaris. Even open barrels, you'll assume, were not touched by the goyim. There's no time. So, frankly, if it's in a time of war, we say they don't have time to fool around and to start being menasach wine to avoid zarah, so they don't have time to rape women. They're busy fighting a war. They can't stop. Omer Rav Mori, no, you don't know how it works. Lival yesh pinai, lenasach ein pinai. For a bia, they have time. Nisach, they don't have time for. So Touch Rit said there's such balei taiva, and there's a much bigger taiva to be mezana than there is to be menasach wine lavodah zarah. So for what's important, they make time. Lenasach, they're not going to make. Yoshki, you're going to have to wait. You, woman, you're not going to wait. You will deal with it right now. Yoshki will have to wait. Even though the bia probably takes more time than the nisach, but even the soldiers, they have their order of importance. So therefore, in our case, in the Mishnah's case, we assume everyone was violated, but the chaviyos will assume we're not nisnasech if there was an act of war. The reason why in our case we say they were violated is because we're not talking about someone who wants to expand. We're not talking about a kingdom who has a war because they want to expand their influence and take over another city. When that happens, the soldiers are going to be very polite. They're not going to want to attack these people because all that's going to happen is the people of the city are going to hate them. And when they try to expand to take over this area, they'll always be rebellious. They'll always be fighting and rejecting the occupation. So therefore, they're not going to violate anybody. And therefore, the wine is going to be mutter, and they're not going to violate the women. But so but if they're in some faraway land fighting, then they're going to be chayis rosh, and they're going to attack and destroy anything in its wake because they never plan to annex this property. They're just fighting a war. So there's no incentive to maintain good relations with the people, and there's no incentive not to destroy the city because they're never going to be collecting taxes from the city. They're never going to need to benefit from that city. Rashi says, they don't want to destroy the Bnei Ir. The king A wants good relations with the people. B wants them to be intact so that they can produce taxes for him. But if it's Malchus Acheres, then they're going to be a marauding gang and destroy everything in its path. I don't understand. Let's say they're annexing it and the king himself wants to maintain good relations. You think every soldier is going to adhere to the rules? These soldiers are animals. The Bach changes from Orak to Akar. It's impossible that one renegade soldier won't sneak around and still violate people. What are you talking about? There was security. All of the battalions, and they had guards. They knew they have to be careful from their own soldiers. So they have military police making sure that all of their soldiers behave properly. Even with that, someone's going to fall asleep and someone's going to get away with it. It's impossible to control it to such a level that the soldiers are going to be behaved perfectly. Omar Blevi is speaking where they had a very sophisticated electronic security and surveillance perimeter. And what do they have? Look at this sophisticated security systems. First, they had chains all around the city. When you open the door in some stores, they have this jingle thing hanging from the door, and it jingles. So they had that all over the city. So you try moving anywhere, you're going to make noise. The Chalba, they had dogs. The Gavza, they had spikes. When you go to a rental car, they tell you do not back out, severe tire damage. So they had spikes all over the place. The Abzan, they had geese. So if a guy tries in the middle of the night to sneak into the city to cause trouble, there's something's going to happen. He's going to bang into something. He's going to bang into a spike. The dogs will bark. The geese will start making noise, and it'll be publicized. So they had such a tight perimeter around the land that they just have taken over to protect the inhabitants of the land that they took over from their own people. We don't need to worry about it, and therefore they're becheskes tahir. Amar Baba Barzavda, Fligi ba Rabbi Yehuda Nasi of Rabbanan. There's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and the Rabbanan. Chad Amar kan bekarchum shel oisa malchus, kan bekarchum shel malchus acheres, v'lekashaloi v'lemidi, and he didn't have any kashas. He for Emford, our mission is speaking bekarchum shel malchus acheres, and that's why we're concerned that they're all asuris by, and the Mishnah that talks about the wine that we assume is not damaged is kachem shalosh malchus, because they don't want to destroy the city. And the other one had all these kashas. Maybe a soldier will get through, maybe the guard fell asleep. Umishani, and he answered, like we just answered, kagoyin the mahadele lamasa shushilta, the kalba, the gavza, the avsa. They used to have now that you have a sticker on our doors from your security, from the alarm company. This house is protected by by Wells Fargo. Let's say this house is protected by Wells Fargo. So these have stickers on their door that said this house is protected by chains and dogs and geese and spikes. So people saw that and said, "Oh, I'm not going to mess with these guys." Amar Avidi bar Avin, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashin. What happens What happens if in that city there happens to be a place, a cave, some hidden place where a woman could hide away? And we'll soon see how many women we're talking about. That will be matzelas ala kahanos kulam. Then all of the kahanos will be saved. There's a little bit of a shaila what this means. Either it means a bunker that can hold all of the women of the city, or it's a bunker that can hold many women of the city. And each woman can say, I was in the bunker. So Mamela, even if we know for sure some women were not in the bunker, yet we'll still say that since it's possible they can tell you they were in the bunker, therefore they're believed. So that's what this case is. However, what if there was a bunker that only held one woman? Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah, what happens if Eina Machzekes Ela Achas? You have a bunker that can only hold one woman. So what are you going to do with a woman who comes and says that I was in the bunker? Do you say that any woman who comes and asks, you can say, she could have, it's possible that she was in the bunker. And if she was in the bunker, then we could be mad to her. Or you don't say that she was in the bunker, because you can't say everybody was in the bunker. It's Tati the Sasri. So now we get ourselves into a new shaila. So what's the difference between two paths? Two people walked from point A to point B. One took path A and one took path B. And in one of these two paths, there's a mace buried, and it would be impossible to walk through that path without having become tamei. one path is impossible to go across without becoming Tomei, and the other one not. And you have two people, one went through one path, one went through the other path. So clearly one of these two people are Tomei. And you walked into one of these paths, and then also Tahiris, and then you touched Truma, for instance, Uva Chavere, and his friend came, Valach Basheni, and also Vasa Tahiris. So the halacha is Rabbi Yehuda Omer, initial zebif neatzmai Tahiris. If Reuben first goes and says, different Tahiris.
If it's the same Taharis, it's for sure, yes.
It's a sure Tamei, yeah. So if Reuben asked about his Tahiris, we're going to say that they're Tahar. If Shimon asked about his Tahiris separately, we're going to say that they're Tamei. But Shneim Kachas, if they both come together to ask the Shiloh together, then Tameos. Now it's important to note that Chaim asked, is it the same Taharis? So Zok Tosh, not only if it's the same Taharis will be Tamei, but even Zok Toshvis, even if they both asked individually and we said that they're both tar, you're still not allowed to eat both of them and assume you're tar. If you ate both of them, you'll also be tummy, because then you're eating Vadei tummy. The Rishonim also say that this is not a shayla on the person. The person himself has to go to the mikvah and be b'tar himself, because it's easier for him to be b'tar himself. And the problem is that you might have in the future to both touch the same tahiris and ask it. This is a shayla on the actual tahiris, not on the people. The people do have to go to the mikvah. Now, Rabbi Yosy argues on the Tanakama. Rabbi Yosy argues, it's Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda, initial zebef ne'atzmai, zebef ne'atzmai tahiris, shneim gachas tameis. It's Rabbi Yosy that argues. Rabbi Yosy argues Rabbi Huda, and he says, ben kach uben kach tamein. No, regardless, they're tamei. So now we need to get an understanding of the machloikis between Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Yosy. If they both came to Bezin together to ask the Shaila, there even Rabbi Yehuda would agree, of course, that the Tahiris are going to be Tamei. If each came to Bezin separately asking about a separate Tahiris, is this Tahir, is this Tamei? Even Rabbi Yossi would agree that it's Tahir. So where's Rabbi Yossi arguing on Rabbi Yehuda? Someone came to ask the Shaila on his own behalf and on his friend's behalf. But again, it was Zachar. So he came and asked the Rav, I have a Shaila about this Tahiris. I went on one of these two paths. Is this mutter or not? And the Rav will say, Tahar. Okay, now that I'm done with that Shaila, I have another Shaila for you. This piece of Tahiris, my friend carried, and my friend touched, and he also walked through one of these paths. And then they said, then they can say mutter again. So it's Bezachar, but it's one person asking both of them. So the halach is mar medamale lebasachas. Rabbi Yossi considers this bevasachas, and therefore it's going to be tamei. Umar Rabbi Yehuda medamale lebazachas. Everyone knows the famous story with the Satmar Rebbe when someone came to ask the question on behalf of his friend. Someone went to the Satmar Rebbe and said, "I'm asking this question on behalf of my friend. He said he did this and this and this terrible affair. He did this and this terrible affair, and he wants to know what he should do to be misaken the Raver." So the Rebbe starts to chuckle and says, why did your friend have to send you? He could have came by himself, and he could have told me that he came on behalf of somebody else. Because there's up to the Gemara, V'hachanami, here in our case, where there's only one room that one woman could have hid away, even the Sharli, L'chulu, Kibasachas Tavi. If you're going to be matter all the women in the city, because maybe this woman is the one that was in hiding, that's mamish like a case of bevazachas. It's a psak that's impossible, because it's impossible that all these women were in hiding where there's only room for one. So there's a very big difference. Hasam vadai ikatum. In the case of the Shnei Shvilin, without a doubt, one of these two things are for sure tomei, because there was a vadai tumah buried in there. Hacha mi emer. Here we don't even know. There's nothing for sure. We don't know for sure that someone was violated. What happens if she's Amr Loinich Basi? What if a woman says, I did not make it into the hideout? So we had a Pesha Asar, but she had a Pesha Hitter, but Veloinich Basi. But somehow I wasn't violated. Mao, what is halacha? Do you believe her? Mi Amrinon. Do we say Ma Lila Shaker, which is amigoli? She could have said that she was in hiding. and she would have been believed. Why is it different than the following story? Someone rented his donkey to his friend. And he told his friend, one of the conditions of the rental is I don't want you taking this route through Nahar Pakoy. The Ikamaya, there's water there, and I know that's going to cause my donkey to die. Don't take my donkey there. Zil Borcha Denerish. How should you go instead of taking Route 1 up the Jordan Valley? Go on Route 60. It's a safer route. You know why? The Lekamai, it's a drier route. They don't have as many terrorists on 60 as they have on 1. But Iu Borcha Denahar Pakoy. And what did he do? He went where he shouldn't have went. Umischamer. And of course, the donkey died. And he wants to get out of it. So Azal Kameh de Rava. He came to Rava. Amarle in, you're right. Itaka took this animal where I wasn't allowed to. But Miu have a Maya. There was no water there. So he was only concerned that I shouldn't go there because of water. There was no water there. So Amar Rava. Rava said, Mali Lashakar. We should believe him because he has a Migui. Ibaya Amarle. He could have said that I went the path where I was instructed to go. So maybe he should be believed. And Abai said, no. You don't see Mali l'shakir b'mokem edim. Where are there edim? So there aren't really edim over here. Over here, there's figurative edim. Rashi says on the very top line, we know there's always water by Nahar Pakoit. And therefore, Amigo is not believed when we know for sure it's impossible that that's true. So Zok Gemara, over here too, isn't there like an Anan Sahadi that when the marauding army comes through, that they would have for sure violated her? So she shouldn't be believed because she could have said that she was in hiding. So there, we know for sure there's always water. There's a river running through Nahar Pakoid. You can't tell me there's no water there. Hacha vade itmi. Can we possibly say that she for sure was violated? Chashashahu. It's a strong chashash that they would have violated all the women. But it's not 100%. And when there's only a chashash that she was violated, we believe her with her migu that she could have said that she wasn't hiding. Are you telling me that her own shivcha is believed to say edus on her that she was not violated? Or many, we learned as follows. We have a kasha. It says someone who's old and he's dying and he doesn't want his wife to fall to yibum to his brother. So what he did is he gave her a get that she said, this get should be chal an hour before I die. So the halacha is he's not supposed to have relations with her. She should not be miyachad with him. Only if there's edim there that can say that they did not have relations. And the reason why she's not supposed to be miyachad is because people are going to end up saying that she has a child. They're going to end up saying that Gita Kadim Levnan, they're going to say that the child was born out of wedlock. So we don't want her to have any relations with him. However, any edim that would be with her would be believed to say that she didn't have relations. But her own shivcha, her own goita who works for her, that would not be a good aid. She's not embarrassed, she's not uncomfortable around her shivcha, and she would have relations with her husband even though her shivcha is aware of it. So therefore, we don't trust shivchasa. She could only be miyachad with him, with anybody else but her own shivcha, because of that extra gaspa that she has.
We're worried that she'll have a baby and what?
Say that it was born out of wedlock.
There's no isser deriser.
It's not an isser. It's not a good situation. So we'd rather they don't have.
But if they're afraid that they'll fall to yibum, if there's a baby, you don't have to be afraid to fall to yibum.
Isn't the issue that the get becomes invalid?
Well, that's not what Rashi says. Rashi says, "V'taima gzeir shema yoimru gita kodem levna." We're afraid we'll say that the get happened before her child was born.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about yibum anymore, right? That was the original problem.
Let's learn Rashi inside. Lo yachad imo b'mesechus gittin. He shchiv mera b'mesechus gittin. Shchiv mera shekasav u'mosher get leishtoi. Shchiv mera gave a get to his wife. Almanas shemeis yeh get lemafreya, and therefore v'lois he's okek lechalitza. So the loch is after he gives that get. Lois is yached imo. She's not allowed to be miyach with him. Shema yovayala. We're afraid they're going to get intimate. But havel get yoshan, and that'll make it a get yoshan, which we say is possible, like Avigdor said. Utnan besil oisrin liftar beget yoshan. Besil holds that if there's a get yoshan, she'll still be mechuyev in yibum. Bezel get yoshan. What is a get yoshan? Kol shenishachad ima me'acher shekosfela. If there's any yichud after the get is written, that apostles the get, and therefore she would still be mechuyev in yibum. The timer. What's the problem with the get yoshan? Why do we say that a get yoshan is not accepted? They might say the get came before her child. So it seems like the main concern is that if she ends up getting pregnant, they're going to say that this child was born out of wedlock.
And because of that, they puzzle a get yoshan. Isn't that the reason they puzzle a get yoshan?
Yeah, I guess so. So it seems like that's the main reason, even though it's not a question of a mamzer. It's just a stigma, I guess. And they don't want that to happen. But I'll call upon them effect to Gemara. You cannot believe a shivcha. You can't believe your own shivcha. You see, there's this level of comfort that won't stop her from having relations with her husband. So why over here in our Mishnah could you believe her own shivcha? And how do we know you can believe her own shivcha? Because our Mishnah doesn't say otherwise. It says about filu shivcha, any shivcha. Amar papi b'shvuya kilui. You're right. In fact, normally we shouldn't be able to believe the shivcha. But since we're in a tight spot over here, she's a shvuya, it's a terrible situation, they were makel even to believe her own shivcha. Rav Papa has a different opinion. He says, Haba shivcha dida, Haba shivcha didei. Her shivcha, there's a certain level of comfort we won't trust. But his shivcha, if he added someone, his secretary, would be believed. The shivcha dida, loy mehemna. Are you still saying that her own shivcha would not be believed? Hakatani, that says, Ein Adam made al atzmai. Our mission just says you can't be made on yourself. So vice the for sure shivcha would be believed, even shivcha dida. Ha shivcha dida mehemna. So tomorrow, you know why? You know why we don't say shivcha beferish? It's because shivcha sa nami ka'atzmadami. A shivcha who you're gaspa, the Tana felt you would understand that when it says you can't say edus on yourself, that of course means shivcha dida as well, because that's mamish like herself. So that was the second terror to the Gemara answers, is that shivcha didei you could trust, shivcha dida you can't, and shivcha dida is included in atzma. Rabbi Ashi Amar, he has a third terror. Havaha b'shivcha dida. We're all speaking about shivcha dida, but there's a very big difference between, in the case of a get yoshan, where shivcha dida will not prevent them from making biyah, versus our case, where a shivcha dida would be nemenis to say that her master was not violated. Why? Because a shivcha mechse chazav v'shaska. What will a shivcha do? She'll see something improper, like her boss having relations, and she won't say anything. Discretion is what the shivcha will have. So hasam, exactly. Hasam dishtit kasam atirasa. There, in the case of get yoshan, all we need her to do is say nothing. We don't need her to say testimony. We want her to keep her mouth shut and not to disclose what occurred. There, loy mehemna. We don't trust her because she might not say anything as out of loyalty to her master. But hacha d'shtikasa is rasa. Here, if the shivcha says nothing, the woman will be assumed to have been violated, and she would be also to her husband the kohen. So therefore, hacha d'shtikasa mehemna hashta. Sorry, hacha d'shtikasa matiyasa loy mehemna. Hacha d'shtikasa is rasa mehemna. Here, that the shtika would ask her, she has to come say testimony. If we're not choshed that she'll actively say testimony that's false, that her master was not violated. We will be choshed that she won't say anything, but we're not choshed that she's going to go so far and actually say a lie. Hashtanami dishtikasa oisrasa mehemna. So therefore, she's believed over here. In fact, the Gemara hashtanami asi umeshakra. Why do you say that? Say that she'll lie as well. Don't you say that she won't say anything, she won't disclose something. Maybe out of loyalty, she'll actually lie and she'll say that her boss was saved. She's not going to do both things. She might not disclose information, but she's not going to actively disclose false information. And you find this elsewhere. There was a big bully whose name was Mori Bar Isik. Some called him Chana Bar Isik. He had a long lost brother that came back. His father went away, and this new brother comes back and says, "I'm your brother." Amalei said, apparently their father had died, and he says, "I want a chelik of the Yerusha. I want my fair share." Amalei Mori Bar Isik said, "Lo yodanalach. I don't know who you are, and I'm not giving you a share. You're not my brother." Also, they came to Reb Chisda. He's right. I think your little brother is right that you didn't recognize him. Yosef recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. Why? A young child who grows up, you might not have recognized him. So it could be he's your brother. And the fact that you don't recognize him is not a raya. Omerle, so Reb Chisda told the brother who's making a claim on the Yerusha, you must bring Edom that you're a brother so that you can collect your fair share. Omerle, the brother said, Isli Sahadi, I have brothers, but the Gavra Almahu, they're afraid to say testimony because they know as soon as they get out of court, Mori Bar Isik is going to crush their skulls for saying testimony against them. He's a bully. So Omerle the day, so Reb Chisda told Mori Bar Isik, you Zil Aisinu, you go bring Edom. Now, Tosfos tells us you cannot tell Bezin, I can't bring any Edom. Whoever I bring will be afraid of him. Because then anybody could always say that. My Baldin's a bully. He has to, I have to Edom, Reuben and Shimon. And they know that I'm a brother, but they're afraid to come and say testimony. So Reb Chisda says, you know what, Mori Bar Isik, you go bring Reuben and Shimon and have them say that he's not your brother. Bring Edom to Lavachachu. Amal Adina Hachi, Mori Bar Isik said, that's the halacha? Isn't the halacha Mochi Mechaver Alav Haraya? So how could you make me prove that he's not my brother? He has to prove that he is my brother. Amr Lei, so Reb Chisda told him, Hachi da'inin alach ulchul al megavra. This is the halacha for you. Bullies like you have this halacha that you have to prove it. Hashtanami aslu mishakri. So Mori Bar Isik says, I'm in a bat. How can you trust, even if I bring Edom, according to you, the lie? It's bad enough that they won't climb up and not want to say edus, but to say false edus, they won't do that even if they're afraid of you, and therefore you need to bring a raya with edus. So you see this concept that someone might not disclose information, but that he won't necessarily actually lie. Okay, it's already 6:54. I'm going to make a dash for the mission, and we'll see how hard it is. Zu edus ish v'isha tinik v'tinoikis avia v'ima v'achel v'achaisa. These are all edus that are able to be said by all these people. Avoloi b'na uvita loy avda v'shefchasa. B'na uvita avda v'shefchasa will not be able to say edus about a woman that she wasn't violated. We had another brayta that says hakoyel nemanim lahayid chutz mehemna ubayla, except for herself and her husband. Rashi says mehemna is herself. The Rapapi u'the Rav Ashi tanoihi. So you have to say that this will be toila in Rapapi and Rav Ashi. I'm sorry, the Rapapi, the Rav Ashi tanoihi. That's right. Rapapi and Rav Ashi are zekah in this machlokes tanoim, because we have a machlokes tanoim if all these people are believed. The Rav Papa milei metanoihi. Is Rav Papa going to be toila in this machlokes tanoim? Zok to Gemara Amalach Rav Papa ki tanya hi b'mesicha lefituma. Maybe there the reason why Shivchas believed is because it's Masich Levitumai. And it is running very late. We'll stop here. We'll come back here tomorrow. We'll be Mamshech tomorrow. Shkoyach. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.